This is Brexiteers listening to you speaking now. They will say, well, Hilary Benn is just doing his best to thwart any form of Brexit. And he might sort of talk about a second referendum, but actually that's the truth, isn't it?
That's not right, Ian, because as you've just acknowledged, I would be prepared to let a deal go through, provided it is put to the people in a confirmatory referendum. So the charge that we will never allow Brexit to happen under any circumstances is wrong, and it is the compromise in British politics, Ian, because as you know, the Prime Minister is prepared in certain circumstances to push us over the cliff with a no-deal Brexit, on the one hand. On the other hand, the Liberal Democrats, if they were to win a majority in the election, would just cancel the referendum result. I do not support either of those positions, but I am prepared to compromise and say I will enable a deal to be agreed, provided it's put to the people, and they will then have the final choice. And as long as Parliament remains deadlocked, then the only way out of this is to go back to the people where this process began.
What do you make of the Comrades poll for the Telegraph yesterday, which showed that 60% of the country, according to this poll, just want Brexit done? 35% of Remain voters just want it done.
What I make of it is this: a no-deal Brexit doesn't get Brexit done. It starts a whole new nightmare of prolonged uncertainty. This is the great deception of the argument that somehow a no-deal Brexit will bring it to an end, it'll all be over. The moment you get the other side of a no-deal Brexit on the 1st of November, you've thrown away the best trade deal we have with any group of countries in the world. That's the first thing. Secondly, the EU will say, before they'll talk about anything, what about the money? What about the citizens' rights? What about an effective backstop for Northern Ireland?
We've already guaranteed citizens' rights and no deal.
And unlike
the EU.
And how long, Ian, will it take for the United Kingdom to negotiate with the European Union a replacement arrangement for all of the different aspects of our relationship? The truth is that a no-deal Brexit doesn't bring it to an end. It starts the next stage of uncertainty. I think you would acknowledge that.
I would agree with that. I would agree with that.
Okay.
Right. But just finally, though, if there is to be a second referendum, which, as you can imagine, I don't want, because I think you have to implement the first referendum before you have a second one. But if there is to be a second referendum, and I'm not even sure there's a majority in Parliament for that any more than there was a few months ago, surely you have to have, if you're going to have Remain on the ballot paper, surely you then have to have deal or no deal on the ballot paper as well.
No, because there was no mandate from the 2016 referendum.
No, there's no mandate for a deal or no deal. It was just to leave.
For no deal. Well, the Leave campaign said we will get a deal. The Leave campaign's central argument was, you vote to leave, we'll get a deal, we'll do it in an orderly
and David Cameron, the Prime Minister at the time, said we would leave on WTO terms if we couldn't get a deal.
Well, David Cameron was not leading the Leave campaign.
No, indeed, but he recognised that we might leave with no deal and said it in the campaign.
Well, I can't speak for David Cameron. All I can say is that there is no mandate for no deal, and I quote as my authority Michael Gove, the co-leader of the Leave campaign, who wrote in an article earlier this year, the British people did not vote to leave without a deal. I rest my case.
OK, we'll leave it there. Hilary, thank you very much. That's Hilary Benn, Labour MP for Leeds Central, Chair of the Brexit Select Committee. You are listening to Cross Question, although we haven't had a question yet to our august panel, which is sitting in front of me. Let's go slightly early to a break. We'll have our first question in just a moment. It's 13 minutes past 8.
This is LBC. Sheila Fogarty, Monday to Friday from 1 p.m.
A lot of you think I'm being unpatriotic because I think Boris Johnson should have been there. Tony in Canvey is a representative. He says, we all get that you don't like Boris. I don't know Boris Johnson. I don't know whether he's likeable or not. I just think the way he does Prime Minister is ludicrous. What about showing respect, says Tony, and stand behind him? I'll stand behind him, Tony, if he's prepared to stand behind a podium.
With Blink, an Amazon company, helping give your family peace of mind.
LBC.
Time is money. Or so money says. Well, money. I know you like to dictate every hour of every day, add to my to-do list and throw the odd spanner in the works. But not anymore. This is my business, and I run it on my watch. I'm in control now, money. And times are changing. Save time with instant business invoicing, now on the Barclays app. Search Barclays Business and make money work for you.
Must have a Barclays business account. T's and C's apply.
Whether your washing machine's on a blink or you're creating your dream kitchen, we've got over 8,000 electricals in stock at AO.com. When it comes to buying appliances, we'll take care of everything from start to finish. We'll even recycle your old appliance for you for as little as £20. AO.com, the online electrical store.
AO! Let's go!
Terms and conditions, availability and geographical exclusions apply.
Fly Ryanair to Ireland this autumn. Stroll along secluded beaches before enjoying a live music session with locals. Fly to Ireland's wild Atlantic way from $24.99 per person one way. Ryanair. Low fares made simple. Limited availability. Booked by the 16th of October for travel by the end of November 2019. For conditions, see ryanair.com.
Radio, playlists and podcasts.
Where it's all together.
And all for free.
Global Player. Download it from your App Store now.
Get the incredible iPhone 11 with unlimited data plans on Vodafone, the UK's best mobile network. With the all-new dual camera system, ultra-wide lens and longer battery life, there's no better way to make the most of it than with unlimited data. The incredible new iPhone 11, unlimited, from just £45 a month plus £29 up front. The future is exciting. Ready? Vodafone.
Price subject to trade-in, 24-month contract. Credit check and RPI increase apply. Download speed applies to unlimited data. Terms and verification at vodafone.co.uk/unlimited.
At Lidl, we're big on everything autumn can throw at us. Big on cozying up to a rainy British roast or soaking up the sun with a fresh chicken salad with a free-range British whole chicken for £3.15 per kilo. And big on all the root veg you dig from 49p. Now that's big on quality and always Lidl on price. Subject to availability, selected stores, excludes NI.
Use Swell Heating's online tool to find the perfect boiler in under 5 minutes. Visit swellheating.com. Rely on us to keep you warm.
Cross Question with Iain Dale on LBC.
Welcome back to Cross Question. We actually haven't had a question yet, but let's go to our first questioner to Anand, Menon, Michael Walker, Matthew Patten and Stewart Jackson. Michael's in Edgware. Go ahead, Michael. Michael, are you there? No? Well, that was a big build-up, wasn't it? Let's try him again.
Hi, can you hear me there,
We
Iain?
can hear you now. What would you like to ask?
Hi, Iain. Hi. I'm just, I've been holding on for a bit, so just before my question, can I just interject? Please have Hilarious Ben on as often as possible. He's the best possible advert we could have for a hard Brexit. I literally enjoyed hearing his scheming.
Okay, well, I think we know where you're coming from.
He's fantastic.
What's your question?
The question for the panel is just simply this. Does the panel realise that although some of them may be horrified at Boris's behaviour and others may be advised him against it, that this is literally the only possible behaviour that the hard leavers or even the moderate leavers were looking to see? Most of us were, in most groups that I've been involved in, were openly saying if Boris doesn't come out fighting, both barrels, rude, tough, absolutely yielding not an inch, then he's going to have lost us. It will be Brexit party all the way. Do they realise that Boris has literally played the only possible way he can play at this point?
OK, Michael, thank you. Matthew Patten, Brexit Party MEP. Boris Johnson, your worst nightmare come true?
No, actually, it might surprise you to know that we were really pleased that Boris came out punching and swinging. I mean, we're absolutely, as you know, about a clean break Brexit. And what Boris had to say in the House today, and his tone and his style and his positiveness, and him demanding really the opposition parties who are playing kind of fast and loose with our process, demanding them to put forward the process for a general election, absolutely is exactly in line with where he could have been a Brexit party person speaking.
How do you accuse the opposition parties of playing fast and loose with the parliamentary process when that's exactly what the Supreme Court found that Boris Johnson has been doing?
Well, so I think two things about that. The first is that I agree. The Supreme Court has judged on that. I think that judgment needs to be made. That needs to be accepted. Boris accepted it. I think there's a completely separate thing, though, with the opposition parties in terms of the process that's been going on for the past 7 weeks.
We may well come on to them a little bit later. But when you look at his belligerent tone today, normally a Prime Minister in that situation would come to the House of Commons seeking to be conciliatory, a little bit humble maybe, but they clearly made a conscious decision not to do that.
Yeah, well, I think that's right. And as I say, I think that was the right thing for him to do. I think this issue has become so binary. It's become so difficult. I mean, the atmosphere in the House for anybody who saw or heard it was quite extraordinary. And, you know, all supervised and choreographed by our wonderful speaker, Mr. Bercow. I don't see what else he could have possibly done.
I've been told that Mr. Bercow has been rather sort of independent today, or not. Anand Menon, what do you make of it? How would you answer Michael's point there?
Well, I understand why the Prime Minister is behaving the way he is, because he has a certain strategy in mind for an election, but I don't buy that it's the only way he could have behaved. I'd prefer a Prime Minister not to break the law, first and foremost, and I don't think there was any need to break the law. I think
he was advised by his Attorney General that it was all legal.
Yeah, OK, I mean, there was a mess up with the legal advice, but actually the irony of this, I think, is Parliament being back isn't going to make a whole load of difference to how things pan out anyway, so it was probably not a waste of time and energy to go through the prorogation debate. Second thing I'd say is I would hold judgment on Boris Johnson till you see any deal he brings back. Because my suspicion is he's going to have to make some compromises, and what he brings back might not be to the taste of all Brexiters, because there'll be compromises around the margins. Thirdly, he's already allowed Parliament to force him legally into a situation where he might have to do something he said he'd rather die in a ditch than do. So he's already on the defensive there. And finally, the proof of the pudding. My suspicion is in number 10, they don't spend a lot of time agonising about Brexit. They spend an awful lot of time agonising about the general election. The proof of the pudding is going to be that election. If Boris Johnson comes out of that election with a healthy majority, his strategy has been superb. If he doesn't, he's failed.
Stewart Jackson.
Well, the question I've got to ask is what law has the Prime Minister broken? Because it seems to me the Supreme Court made up law.
Well, just stick to the question here, because I'm sure somebody will ask about the judgment a little bit later. So just answer Michael's question.
Well, the point I'm making, Ian, is that he didn't really have much choice. He's in a tight spot because of this Parliament. He has the backing of the people, I think, in general terms, if you look at the polls. People now, the danger for the Supreme Court particularly is that people believe that it's biased and it's the part of the establishment trying to stop Brexit, and that is the danger for them. And long term, of course, the Supreme Court has opened a Pandora's box in terms of how the media will look at it and things like pre-appointment hearings and that kind of thing, and it may very well go the way of the US Supreme Court. But in terms of Boris, he had no choice other than to come out fighting, because Parliament has sunk to such low levels in public esteem and authority that essentially he has to put himself on the side of the people. And after all, you're right to push Hilary Benn, who came over as pretty slippery, I have to say, because they won't vote for no deal. They're too cowardly to vote for what many of them want to do, which is to revoke Article 50. They won't back any deal that Boris Johnson brings back, the Labour Party, and yet they say we want a general election. You know, the voters aren't stupid. They can see through this subterfuge and this slipperiness. And I think, you know, Boris actually has really put his finger on it in terms of getting the mood of the public, that people are done with this zombie Parliament. And Geoffrey Cox was absolutely right. It's a dead Parliament. And if they had any self-respect and integrity and honesty, one of the parties tomorrow would move a no-confidence vote to test the mood.
You understand why they're not going to do that, don't you?
Yes, for the cynical reasons, because they want a broken-back Boris Johnson limping on.
They say that they don't want a no-deal Brexit. That's got to be ruled out first. That is what they say is their top priority.
Well, Hilary Benn is typically duplicitous there, because he says that he doesn't want a no-deal Brexit, but he's taken no deal off, and in taking no deal off as a government strategy, as a negotiating gambit, he's almost totally taken the legs out from the Prime Minister in getting a decent deal which can unite the whole party. Along the lines of the Brady Amendment, for instance. I mean, can I just finish here to make one point is, I think what they want to do is play for time, get to 2020 and say, the mandate's 4 years old, let's have another referendum, and it will basically be, they'll fiddle the franchise and it will be Remain versus a different type of Remain.
Do you think we can get through the rest of the hour without using words like slippery and duplicitous? Because, I mean, Hilary Benn is a respected politician. Can we not let the arguments speak for themselves?
Well, I've known him a long time. In fact, I was on Ealing Council with him over 25 years
Goodness
ago.
me.
So, maybe not as well-versed as some people, but I do know him pretty well.
Okay, Michael Walker from Novara Media, which I should explain. Well, you explain Novara Media to people.
Novara Media is an independent online left-wing media organisation, so we host lots of online debates. Yeah, well, we existed long before Jeremy Corbyn, which is something I like to emphasise, because people often get that the wrong way around.
Well, I think, to be fair, Jeremy Corbyn existed a long time before Novara Media was.
Okay, yeah, I'll take that correction. But we existed a long time before he became the leader of the Labour Party.
Should Boris Johnson have struck a different tone today?
In terms of the tone today, I don't think it makes that much difference. In terms of what your caller was saying, in terms of Boris Johnson, we're talking about how he's broken the law, how he's lying to the public. Most people will just see him trying to get Brexit at all costs. Now, I don't think there's that much evidence that most people think that. Boris Johnson is playing a very risky game. He's saying that he is going to try and win the next general election by appealing to a proportion of the population who do want Brexit at all costs and don't care if someone breaks the law or lies.
Since we've been on air at 7, on our Twitter feed, on our text, it's been 95% of people. And that's not just because people think, oh, well, it's an Iain Dale echo chamber. It really isn't that. I haven't seen this before.
95% of people what, sorry?
Supporting Boris Johnson.
Supporting Boris Johnson.
Saying he got struck exactly the right tone. Good on Boris. Even some Remainers saying that, which I must admit I was slightly surprised by.
Well, I mean, I'd be quite surprised by that. I mean, to be honest, people tweeting to your show, that's not social science, is it? So we'll have
anecdotal.
It's an interesting anecdote, but we'll have to wait and see. And I think what's going to be damaging to Boris Johnson about this whole furore is that it comes back to he's essentially a dishonest politician. So he said when he prorogued Parliament that the reason he was doing this is because he wanted to have a Queen's speech and this was completely normal. He wanted to get on with an economic and social agenda. It was quite clear to everyone that wasn't the case. And I think it's fair enough for the courts and Parliament to hold him up on that. And I think that's what's happened. And he's been found out. And potentially, yes, there will be some members of the public who don't mind that. But I think I'd bet there probably are enough who do. But as you say, we'll have to see how that plays out in public opinion polls and in a general election.
Can I interrupt?
Matthew?
Sorry, just to interrupt. I think you're absolutely right in terms of what you say in terms of the actions of the court and the right of the court and all those sorts of things. But that's not really, I think, what the question was about. The question was about kind of tone and style and substance. I think we all have an idea that we want our politicians to be more statesman-like. I watch the House of Commons. And there are times when I'm embarrassed by it, and I think this is going around the world and all those sorts of things. But when I compare it to what goes on in the Parliament in Strasbourg, where there is a absolute lack of debate, the way things are staged are completely sterile. There is no passion or anything like that. What happened this afternoon and this evening, for all the the concerns that some people might have about that, absolutely was real democracy taking place in real time that we could all see, and it really mattered to everybody. So I think Boris was great.
Simon Byers tweeted, Iain, can I just reduce that percentage slightly with this tweet? Let's go to another question. Richard is in Mansfield. Richard, what would you like to ask?
I'd basically like to ask, over the past 3 years, have we seen a shift from where people really took facts more importantly, and now it's more like how people feel, especially, for example, the court case the other day. It was quite clear what they said, and now it's changed to, well, we don't believe that they're genuine. And are we really moving into a dangerous area where that's going to overtake people's opinions?
So you're worried that we've got to a point where opinions are more important than facts. So that's a really interesting question, isn't it? Because, of course, this radio station is based on opinions. I mean, we like to deal with facts as well, but all of our presenters are encouraged to offer opinions. So you have one set of opinions between 10 and 1 in the morning and another set of opinions maybe between 7 and 10 at night. Does this matter, Michael Walker? I mean, your organisation, Novara Media, is based on opinions as well as journalism, isn't it?
We do more analysis, and I'll tell you why we do more analysis. I think this actually might tell you quite a lot about the media at the moment, which is it's a lot cheaper. It's quite cheap to have an opinion. So we're kind of a part-time organisation.
I'm not cheap.
Our funding is, you might not be actually. We probably couldn't afford you on our channel.
No, you really couldn't.
But the phrase was always comment is free, isn't it? And I think there is in the media a bit more comment than investigative journalism, for example, partly for that reason, because there's less money in the media than there used to be. I would potentially push back against that idea that now, more than previously, people are more driven by emotion than facts. I think to some degree, people are better informed than they've ever been when it comes to politics. And what we have seen is the breaking down of the gatekeepers of information, which means that yes, sometimes lies do go out of control and they spread around like wildfire. But also, there are many things which were once taken as a given, which were endorsed by the establishment. Austerity is a good thing. We have to go to war to protect our national interest. These kind of things, which the breaking up of the monopoly of big corporate media or state subsidised media or whatever has allowed for new facts to emerge, and I think that's generally a positive thing.
Anand Menon, you're a professor, you deal in facts, but you have to interpret those facts, so inevitably you're offering opinions as well.
No, everyone's take on the world is shaped by their worldview, and the best you can do is try and avoid it as much as possible. What I would say is we've done some survey on this, and what it shows is, two things I suppose. One, the depths of the division in our society. So, for instance, a majority of Remainers would not rent a room in their house to a Leaver. A significant majority of Remainers would be very or quite upset if one of their kids married a Leaver. I mean, it's really a polarised society.
It's not the same on the other side, though, is it?
It's far less. It's far more profound that way than the other way. Actually, you find that there's more anger on the Remain side than the Leave side. For we can speculate on the reasons, but what that translates into is people are starting to interpret facts differently. So we did a poll where we asked people, how has the British economy performed since the referendum? Not how will it perform after Brexit, how has it performed? And people split down the middle. Leavers said the economy has performed very well. Remainers said the economy hasn't performed at all well. So I think the caller had a real point here, is that increasingly we tend to view the world through the prism of our ideological lenses, and it shapes how we view facts, let alone how we voice our opinions.
And Stewart Jackson, are you worried that we're going down the way of America, where if you're on the right, you just watch Fox News; if you're on the left, you'll watch MSNBC or CNN, and so people tend to live in their own echo chambers, which has never really been the case in this country, maybe up until now.
Well, I think there's been significant societal change where we're less inclined to be deferential to our so-called elders and betters. And I think that's a function of economic changes. I think people are better educated generally. There's more access. I mean, I laugh when people say, Leave voters were low information at the referendum, because there was never so much information available from the government, from magazines, blogs, newspapers and TV and radio. I think you're right, though, and Anand's right, that people are seeing political issues through the prism of Leave and Remain. And that's why, until we get some kind of finality and conclusion of this long, drawn-out 3.5-year debate, if it's possible to do that, then I think this division in society will continue. The good thing is, and I remember the day I knocked on a door in my then constituency, and a man said to me, "We haven't voted for 25 years, but the whole family are going to vote in the referendum because it matters. And we feel our vote is as important as the next person." At least people now are politically engaged, and people are actually discussing, alternative arrangements, the customs union, the single market opt-outs, and all these kinds of things. And that is a positive side, I think. So let's not see it totally in a negative light.
Matthew Patten from the Brexit Party, do you worry that when I see tweets from people saying, well, of course, I don't listen to LBC between 10 and 6 because it's sort of Remainer central. I'll listen to Nick Ferrari and then switch on when Iain Dale or Nigel Farage comes on. That really worries me, because it means that these people just want to hear their own opinions reflected back to them.
So I think it's always been like that. I don't think this is a new phenomenon. I think the world has changed, but people, in the old days before we had smartphones and things like that, and people bought a newspaper, they'd buy a certain kind of newspaper. Back in the old days, where the world was really defined by class and things like that, people's opinions were formed very much by their communities that they lived in. What's happened, and has been amplified, I think, by the whole Brexit debate, is that we've seen a shift from left and right class warfare more to Leave and Remain. I think the two mainstream broad-based parties are still really struggling to come to terms with that, Labour and the Conservatives. But what I want to say is we've never had more facts. It's just hard to tell whether they're true or not. I mean, I get million trillion facts every day through my phone and things like that. But so much, it's a blizzard.
And just in 20 seconds, Alan, does your research bear this out, that people are now identifying as Leave and Remain rather than Conservative or Labour?
Far more so, though we've got to be a bit careful about that, because if you look at the last election, 2017, class was still a more important driver of how people voted than the Brexit referendum. And remember, everyone was talking about the death of two-party politics, and Labour and the Tories between them got 82% of the votes.
Well, not sure they will next time. We have to go to the news now, but do keep your calls coming. Questions for our panel, Professor Anand Menon, Michael Walker, Matthew Patten and Stewart Jackson. It's 8:34, news headlines with Andy Ivey.
There have been fiery exchanges in the House of Commons where Boris Johnson has challenged opposition parties to call a vote of no confidence in his government tonight. That could trigger a general election. Mr Johnson also hit out at the Supreme Court, saying it had intervened in a political matter after 11 judges ruled that his suspension of Parliament was unlawful. The Labour leader, Jeremy Corbyn, told MPs the Prime Minister thinks he's above the law and said he's not fit for the office that he holds. Donald Trump claims he's the victim of the biggest witch hunt in American history after Democrats launched an impeachment inquiry. The White House has released a summary of a phone call he made to the Ukrainian leader in which he asked for help investigating his political rival Joe Biden. LBC weather, showers in the north and east of England dying out overnight. Further rain moving eastwards and a low of 10. Tomorrow that rain clearing, followed by sunny spells and blustery showers, a high of 21 degrees.
LBC.
Whether your washing machine's on a blink or you're creating your dream kitchen, we've got over 8,000 electricals in stock at AO.com. When it comes to buying appliances, we'll take care of everything from start to finish. We'll even recycle your old appliance for you for as little as £20. AO.com, the online electrical store.
AO, let's go!
Terms and conditions, availability and geographical exclusions apply.
OK, it's a circle of massive stones sticking up in the middle of a field in England. Could be goalposts, look a bit like goalposts, or dominoes. They look very heavy. It looks like someone's nicked half of them. How do they manage that? They look miles too big to get in a van.
Words don't really do it justice, do they?
Got to see it, mate.
Absolutely. Don't lose the picture. Search Specsaver's free eye test online today. Offer ends 31st of October. Participating stores only. Conditions apply.
The high-quality kitchen you've dreamed of at a price well within your budget. That's Room Sense.
That's Room Sense.
This month, all kitchens are half price with a free oven hob and extractor. Book your free home design visit today at roomsense.co.uk.
Quality at a price you can afford. That's Room Sense.
Offer ends soon. Minimum spend applies.
I am a force for good.
I am a force for courage.
And for calm.
I am a force for safety.
For fairness.
For leadership.
I am a force for the future.
For compassion.
For my community.
I am a police officer.
And I am a force for all.
Be one of the 20,000 new police officers and be a force for all that you believe in. Search Join the Police.
At Experian.co.uk, we know being single's no fun. That's why we do everything we can to help you meet your ideal match, your data self.
Until I met my data self, I had no idea which credit card was right for me. He was able to show me the ones I was eligible for before I even applied. It really has changed my life.
Find out how your data self could help you make better financial decisions at Experian.co.uk. Experian Limited is a credit broker, not a lender working with selected lenders.
Hey phone, connect to Wi-Fi.
Connecting to cyber criminals.
You're not listening. I said Wi-Fi.
I'm listening. Cyber criminals could be too. Using Wi-Fi could leave your personal data exposed.
How can I keep it private?
With a secure VPN that encrypts your data, you need new Norton 360. It has multiple layers of protection, including VPN, device security, password manager, and more.
Ooh.
Go to uk.norton.com to get all-in-one protection starting at $24.99 for your first year. Terms apply. That's uk.norton.com.
TalkTalk Business Superfast Fibre. Average speed 67 megabits per second. For Sparks electricians, chefs and beauticians. With a 365-day UK contact centre. Rated great on Trustpilot by Builders and Brickies, accountants and techies. Fibre broadband for every business, now only $25.50 a month, excluding 20% VAT, with no connection fee on a 24-month contract. Offer ends 29th of September. Call 0333 0605 811. TalkTalkBusiness.co.uk for butchers and bakers and wedding dressmakers. T's and C's apply.
Cross Question with Iain Dale on LBC.
It's 8:38. You're listening to Cross Question on LBC. If you'd like to watch us, you can do so on the LBC website, on the YouTube channel, Facebook page and Twitter feed. With me in the studio, Professor Anand Menon, Director of UK in a Changing Europe. Michael Walker is Editor at Novara Media. Matthew Patten is a Brexit Party MEP. And Stewart Jackson, former Chief of Staff to David Davis, former Conservative MP for Peterborough. Right, next question is from Alex in Fulham. Hi, Alex.
Hi, Ian.
What would you like to ask?
I'd just like to ask the panel specifically what they think about the Supreme Court judgment that's been made. Particularly, I don't understand how, if it was only they say it's unlawful, but if it's only become unlawful because of their judgment, that their assessment of how the law should operate. So how could it have been unlawful at the time he gave the advice?
Anand Menon.
Well, what the court has said basically is, because the Prime Minister couldn't provide sufficient reasons for doing something that was out of order and would prevent Parliament from doing what it's constitutionally required to do, which is to pass legislation and to scrutinise, there was something wrong with the decision. What the court didn't say was you can't prorogue for that long. All they were saying was we need a decent reason for doing something that breaks with the nature of prorogations in the past.
But how is that a legal decision? I mean, it is sort of political, isn't it? And it's the first time that a court like this has involved itself in essentially a political issue.
I think it would have been political if the Prime Minister had provided them with reasons that were political and the court had said they are not sufficient political reasons. That would have been very, very deep water for the court. But simply the court was saying, we have a constitutional system which rests on the ability of Parliament to legislate and to scrutinise. And unless good reasons are given for preventing Parliament from doing that, that is a breach of the law of the land.
Stewart Jackson.
Well, it seems a bit of an odd situation where apparently Boris Johnson broke the law because he prorogued to stop Parliament passing legislation when they've passed the legislation in question, the Benn Act, in order to stop no deal. And in fact, what the Supreme Court did was not opine on an existing law. They effectively invented a law. They said, this is our value judgment on a parliamentary tradition or convention, which is parliamentary sovereignty, Parliament serving under the Crown, and because you deemed it appropriate to have a prorogation, which incidentally happened in Canada in 2015 and in 1949 under the Labour government under Clement Attlee, for an extra week or 6 days, that was so-called unlawful and illegal. And I just think it is a slippery slope, frankly. It's a Pandora's box that the Supreme Court have opened, because we now inevitably will move to a much more politicised court. And
why is that inevitable?
Well, because I have to say, for people on the left, the Liberal Democrats and the Labour Party particularly, who are crowing about this decision, this will come back to bite them on the backside. Because even when a Labour government, a future radical left-wing Labour government is elected and decides to appropriate the assets of independent schools, the Supreme Court will step in and say that you have fallen foul of royal prerogative, even when legislation has been put before the House. Stuart. So can I just finish? I think that will be the Rubicon has been crossed now, in, as you say quite rightly, Ian, in terms of involving these jurists in intensely political debates, and it will affect all politicians. And I think that, in answer directly to your question, that is why there will be a pushback from the politicians. As I said in a column I did yesterday, for every action there's
in your brand new Telegraph column.
In my Telegraph column, for every action there's a reaction, and politicians of all shades will say, well, look, if you're interfering in politics, we're going to have to interfere in making you fully and truly accountable to our constituents.
Okay, Alan, you wanted to come back.
All I was going to say is
Sorry,
that might be a reason why those on the Conservative side might one day be grateful for the Supreme Court and might be careful about how critical they are of it, because if your political opponents try things that the court views as being outside the scope of the law, you might end up being profoundly grateful for its existence.
Michael Walker.
Well, I think that concept of parliamentary sovereignty is what's key. So in the United States, they have a politicised court because even if Congress agrees something, the court can overrule it, right? Whereas here, prorogation was not decided by Parliament. Prorogation was decided by the executive, and what the Supreme Court have done is they've intervened in a conflict between the executive and the legislature, which is very different to overriding Parliament because it wasn't a parliamentary decision. Yeah, so that's why I don't see this leading to the politicisation of the court in the same way that it does in the United States, because they haven't interfered in parliamentary sovereignty. What they've done is made a comment about what powers the executive has in relation to Parliament.
Well, they've prescribed the powers of the First Lord of the Treasury and indeed the monarch. And I think that is setting a very dangerous precedent and breaking convention, as indeed Bercow has broken convention as Speaker in terms of the way he's interpreted Standing Order 24 about whether a motion is neutral or could be amended. I mean, we are
so
now...
that could go to the Supreme Court in future, couldn't it?
Well, indeed. And I think, personally, Bercow could face, if it were not specifically exempted, I think MPs are actually exempted in civil law, misfeasance in a public office for some of the things he has been alleged to have done.
Matthew?
So I was always brought up to respect the law and obey the law. And again, I think we live in a culture that we aspire to, that people believe that. The fact is, not every day, but many times during the year, the government is brought before the courts. There are judicial reviews. I mean, I'd go back to Tony Blair and say, the creation of the judicial review system and all that sort of thing actually has been a real problem. But the government is regularly hauled over the coals by the courts and is made to change its mind. And in one sense, this is no different to that. But I agree with you, Stewart. I think that this, in the absence of a written constitution, because we live on precedent and things like that, bringing the courts into this kind of interpretative space is dangerous, and inevitably politicians are going to start to try to use it more and more and more and more, and inevitably that means that people who are our judges are going to be under more and more scrutiny.
We've had some great questions, some great answers, I think, from everybody so far. Let's continue. 0345 6060 973. It's 8:45.
James O'Brien, Monday to Friday from 10 a.m.
Just think about this. If the Scottish Court and the English Court could arrive at different decisions and end up both appealing to the Supreme Court, where now do you file the idea that Brussels makes our laws, or that Brussels somehow intervenes or interferes in the delivery of justice?
Leading Britain's conversation. This is LBC.
My mum can't remember my first steps. She can't remember walking me to my first day at school, or watching me walk down the aisle. She doesn't even remember I'm her daughter. But I do. That's why I'm walking the Alzheimer's Society Memory Walk for my mum. Join me to help defeat dementia. Sign up at memorywalk.org.uk. Who will you walk for? memorywalk.org.uk.
Finding your perfect new home can be tough. So if you keep missing out,
it's time to search at On the Market.
There are thousands of new properties to buy or rent every month at onthemarket.com. 24 hours or more before they're on Rightmove or Zoopla.
On the Market.
See them first. Set up a property alert today.
Search onthemarket.com to find your perfect home.
If you're in the market, search onthemarket.com. See onthemarket.com/new and exclusive. Agents specify exclusivity.
At Dacia, we don't like to blow our own trumpet. Our customers do that for us by making Dacia Europe's fastest growing car brand in 2019. So, to say thank you, we're offering 6.9% APR representative with £500 deposit contribution on the award-winning Dacia Duster until the end of September. Search Dacia Duster today. Dacia PCP Finance, £500 finance deposit contribution is available on new Duster only, subject to status, 18 plus, T's and C's apply, ordered, registered and financed by 30th of September. Retail customers at participating dealers only.
Clean shirt?
Yep.
Tie straight?
Uh-huh.
Shoes polished?
Yes.
You work hard to make a good impression when out with customers. And with eReceptionist,
Landline number.
your phone works just as hard
Studio recorded greeting.
when they call in.
24/7 answering?
All sorted.
eReceptionist, the professional business phone system that's just 30 pence a day. To find out more and get your free 30-day trial, search eReceptionist. Free trial cancellation required to avoid charges. Conditions apply.
The 1304 LNER train, Coach C. Taking aunties with cold hands to nephews with warm cheeks in Edinburgh. Remorseful revellers back to their beds in Leeds. Business mums gliding over the Forth Bridge towards a door in toddlers in Newcastle. And a band, heading to London to our group of strangers in a tiny pub. This is us. These are our journeys. This is our LNER.
Whether your washing machine's on a blink or you're creating your dream kitchen, we've got over 8,000 electricals in stock at AO.com. When it comes to buying appliances, we'll take care of everything from start to finish. We'll even recycle your old appliance for you for as little as £20. AO.com, the online electrical store.
AO! Let's go!
Terms and conditions, availability and geographical exclusions apply.
Cross Question with Iain Dale on LBC. Call 0345 6060 973.
It's 12 minutes to 9. We're going to extend Cross Question this week to 9:15 because that will mean we've had the full hour because we missed 15 minutes at the beginning with Hilary Benn. If you just tuned in, our panel, Michael Walker from Novara Media, Matthew Patten, Brexit Party MEP for the East Midlands, Stewart Jackson, former Conservative MP and former Chief of Staff to David Davis, and Professor Anand Menon, Director of UK in a Changing Europe. And don't forget, if you want to watch us, you can do so on all the usual places. James is in Merthyr Tydfil. Hello, James.
Hi, Ian. How are you?
Very well, thank you. What would you like to ask?
Yeah, I just got a question for the panel. Basically, reflects what's happened to me this week, because I went to the Labour Party offices today and I asked them, can you explain to me your stance on Europe, your neutral stance to me? And once they explained it to me, I was at that. Now, go and listen to what you said to me. Does that make any sense to you? Because it doesn't make any sense to me, Ian.
Well, you haven't told us what they said.
Well, they said that they're basically going to be, their stance is neutral.
Right. Michael Walker convinced James that he can support Labour even though he doesn't know what their stance is going to be.
Yeah, well, I mean, there is a stance that is quite clear, which is that if you vote Labour, you're going to have a second referendum. There's going to be a leave option on the ballot, which to me is going to look something quite like May's deal, but with a customs union. I think it will be a tweaked withdrawal agreement and Remain. So that's going to be their position. And Jeremy Corbyn is intimating or suggesting that he is going to stay neutral in that referendum, a bit like Harold Wilson did in the 1970s. And if we move back to the conversation we were having before the break, which was about how there's, a horrible cultural divide which is running through the country and people are seeing facts through completely different lenses, and there isn't particularly, any arbiter of what is true and what is not, and that we want to bring people together, I think that's a perfectly respectable position to take. It's electorally risky, yes, because I think there are many people in the country who are very much ingrained as a Leaver or a Remainer, and they want to look at a politician who is telling them that they are one of those categories. But I think one, it's clear, which is if you vote Labour, that's what you'll get. And if you vote Labour, you'll either get a soft Brexit or you'll get Remain, and it will depend on how people vote in that second referendum. And also there is a strong logic behind it, which is that the Labour Party is saying they do want to bring people together.
But you've got the leader of the Labour Party saying he's not going to say how he would vote. You've got Emily Thornberry, John McDonnell, Tom Watson, Keir Starmer all saying that they would campaign for Remain even if they had negotiated the deal, which I think most people find a little bit weird.
Well, so yeah, I agree there, and that's why I think it's really important that we move away from this framing of negotiation. I think if you go to the EU and say, we want a really good deal, and if you give us a bad deal, we'll campaign for Remain, that's not a very good negotiating position. So I think what they should be
but they're saying if you give us a good deal, we'll still advocate Remain.
What I'm saying, the point is, I don't think there should be any renegotiation. I think Labour and Jeremy Corbyn used these words in his speech, actually, is that we're going to agree a new deal, which is based on the red lines we've always set out. So then I think we know what deal we're going to get, fundamentally. It's going to be a bit like May's deal, but with a customs union attached, right? So there isn't a negotiation, and then the leadership of the party, Jeremy Corbyn, is going to say, I will remain neutral. I want the population to be as best informed as possible, and they can decide. And then everyone else in the party can campaign quite passionately for whichever option they want. So McDonnell, Thornberry, that will be Remain. Potentially you'll have someone like Ian Lavery or John Trickett coming out for Leave. And I think it's important as well that there is a party in the country that's saying it's perfectly legitimate to be a Remainer, it's perfectly legitimate to be a Leaver. The sky's not going to fall in with either of the options that they're putting to the public, unlike a no deal, and the people this time round can genuinely decide.
But is it credible for a man who wants to be Prime Minister to go into an election and not tell the electorate which side he falls down on?
Well, I mean, he's taking a neutral position, and I mean, I think there are many people in the country.
Is it?
Well, he's taking So let's look at what Jeremy Corbyn has demonstrated phenomenal leadership on in terms of what is he.
Let's talk about
this is important, right? Because people have different priorities, and I have to say I feel the same myself. I don't mind that much if we remain or if we leave. What I'm completely passionate about is that we have
met anyone like you before.
What I'm completely passionate about is that we have a non-aggressive foreign policy, that we don't start unnecessary wars in the Middle East. What I'm completely passionate about is ending austerity, taxing the rich, and making sure that we have a well-funded NHS and we have a more equal education system. What I'm passionate about is a green industrial revolution where we transform climate change. No, but the whole point is he's shown leadership on all of these issues.
Yeah, but not on this.
And on Brexit, he's saying, look, I actually don't think this guy's going to fall in. I'm going to try and bring people together. And why should he pretend to be passionate about something he's not passionate about?
Issue of our generation. And somebody who aspires to be Prime Minister is not going to be credible in the debates that inevitably will happen, I think, this time in an election campaign. I don't see how you can hold that position.
I mean, you speak to more callers than I do, but so to me it seems completely plausible that there are going to be many people, and I've spoken to many people in my circles and my family, in fact, who see this idea of someone saying, look, I'm going to remain neutral, we'll let the people decide, let's try and diffuse this. And I think people see that, well, some people see that as a perfectly sensible, logical and honourable position to take.
But it's
I
not,
don't know if that's how...
Stewart Jackson.
It's totally not neutral, is it? I mean, let's cut to the shorthand. May's deal with the customs union is called staying in the EU, and you're going to put staying in the EU against Remain. It's going to be a phony referendum. You're going to try and change the franchise to 16-year-olds and get everyone who are EU citizens to vote as well. You're going to load the civil service if you're in a position.
Have they said that?
Well, Starmer intimated at the conference that they will change the franchise because they want to fiddle the franchise in order to win and stack the cards. And look, it is not... I can understand what you're saying about, trying to take the heat out of the situation, but you can't treat people as fools. People know, as Iain said, if you go to Brussels and say, we're going to get a Labour deal, it's going to be a great Labour deal with a customs union, and then go back and say, but we're then going to have a referendum after we've had a one-day conference because we still can't make up our minds, and then we're going to campaign for Remain because the deal we've spent ages negotiating is so rubbish. I mean, it's just such a ludicrous nonsense concept, and it will fall apart with the first contact in the election campaign. And the reason for that is, let's be honest, and I like him for this reason alone, Corbyn is a lifelong Eurosceptic. What he wants to happen is he believes that there will be chaos with no deal under the Tories. He can come in and a socialist government can sweep all before it and win the election.
Then he should let the Tories have no deal then, if your logic is correct.
Well, he should.
We know you think he should.
I don't think there will be chaos in the event of no deal. But the reason the Labour Party are twisting themselves into all these places over this policy is because essentially a metropolitan, cosmopolitan, ultra-left membership is being led by a lifelong, principled, Eurosceptic Brexiteer.
And then Menon.
Well, what Labour's Brexit policy tells me is that Labour will be determined that the next election isn't about Brexit. They will spend as little time as possible talking about it. I think the gamble for the Labour leadership is if we talk about austerity, if we talk about hospitals, we talk about the Green New Deal, we can drown the Brexit issue out, as they kind of did in 2017. Now, on the policy itself, I'd say two things. I see the point of it as an electoral device. Labour's in a bind. It has some of the most pro-EU, pro-Remain constituencies, some of the most pro-Leave constituencies. Taking a position will be electorally damaging. Though I do wonder whether this time Jeremy Corbyn really can go around the country saying, I'm not going to tell you what I think. What I do think, though, is even if this strategy works in an election, the real danger for Labour is what this strategy means for them if they win. I just this week watched the Cameron years and I was reminded of just how bitter that fight was in the heart of the Conservative government around the referendum. And I think Jeremy Corbyn is setting himself up for the same fate. He goes to Brussels, he negotiates a deal, he comes back and open warfare breaks out amongst the government over Europe. That won't be a good look and it won't make for a long-lasting government.
Matthew?
Well, it's a car crash, isn't it? I mean, it's all you can say. James is absolutely right. Everyday people, we're walking in, we're asking the question, and with respect to Michael, what we're getting is a kind of 5-minute, quite complicated explanation of what sounds like we're going to go to Brussels, we're going to negotiate a deal, we think they're going to give it to us, then we're going to come home, we're going to negotiate against it, then we're going to have a Remain versus Remain referendum. I mean, it's just not even the beginnings of a strategy. What I think will happen and I think the pressures of the next few weeks are going to do it to them, is actually that it won't stand the test. We're absolutely going to see the Lib Dems taking a stance around revoke. Clearly, the Brexit Party is about clean break. We're going to see Labour, I think, increasingly polarise around the idea of referendum as a point of difference. We're going to get rid of the whatever, they'll go straight to referendum. And the interesting one for me actually is going to be the Conservatives, who, if they solidify around the idea of a withdrawal deal, funnily enough, they're the one who are going to have the least clear proposition, because no one's going to really understand what it is.
Michael, I don't know if you can help me with this. I have put this question to various Labour MPs at the conference. I said, imagine I'm a voter. I open the door to you, you're canvassing me, and I say to you, right, 30 seconds, explain Labour's policy. Go.
Vote Labour and you'll either get soft Brexit or Remain, and which one we get will depend on how people vote in a referendum within 6 months of Labour entering government.
Is that a vote-winning policy? I just wonder.
Well, what are the 5 million Leave voters going to do with that policy?
Well, so that's why, and I think
they're going to wave goodbye.
Look, your point about it not being neutral, I think, was important, because it's neutral between soft Brexit and Remain. It's not neutral in terms of all positions. What Jeremy Corbyn and the Labour Party are taking a very strong position is against a no-deal Brexit, but also a hard Brexit, so a Brexit which is harder than May's withdrawal agreement. So what vote Labour, get soft Brexit or get Remain, and it will be decided within 6 months of
But
Labour
soft
government.
Brexit,
that to me is quite a simple and understandable position.
Soft Brexit is a artificial concept invented by Remainers.
It's just another treaty.
There's no such thing.
Well, first of all, it wasn't invented by Remainers, because, as has been pointed out tonight, there were many people before the referendum who spoke about staying in a single market and staying in a customs union, and that being Brexit. So a soft Brexit has always existed. There will be some people who oppose it, which is fine. And if they passionately do not want a soft Brexit or Remain, then probably they won't vote Labour. And sometimes you have to repel some voters. That's the nature of democracy, isn't it?
Here's a good question, which I'm not going to ask you to answer because it's kind of rhetorical. Someone called Not So Bad, Not So Good says, we keep getting told that there was no mandate for no deal from the referendum. Does the panel agree that there definitely was no mandate for Remain from the referendum then? Can we all agree on that?
Yes. We were just talking about facts, weren't we?
We can all agree on that. That's a great time to go to the news. We will be continuing with Cross Question for another 15 minutes. So if you haven't got your question asked or answered so far, do keep giving us a call. You're listening to LBC. I'm Iain Dale. It's 9 o'clock.
On your radio, on Global Player, and
Play LBC.
leading Britain's conversation. This is LBC.
From Global's newsroom, Boris Johnson has told Parliament it's paralysed and has challenged opposition parties to call a confidence vote in the government that could trigger a general election.
They have until the House rises today to table a motion of no confidence in the government. Come on then. And we can have that vote tomorrow.
The Prime Minister has been addressing the Commons after being forced to return because of yesterday's decision by the Supreme Court that his suspension of Parliament was unlawful. Labour leader Jeremy Corbyn demanded an extension to Brexit before an election is called. The SNP's Westminster leader Ian Blackford suggested his party would not take up the offer until the threat of a no-deal Brexit was removed, and he called for the Prime Minister to quit.
Have you no shame, Prime Minister? Mr. Speaker, the Prime Minister's position is no longer tenable. His failure to resign is an embarrassment.
The former Justice Secretary and now independent MP David Gauke has told Ian here on LBC he thinks the Prime Minister's strategy is to double down on appealing to Brexit supporters at whatever cost.
If that means attacking institutions, whether it is Parliament, quite explicitly, or off the record anonymous briefings about the judiciary, then that's what they'll do. And I have to say, as a Conservative, I feel very uncomfortable with that.
MPs are expected to vote tomorrow on a motion for a 3-day Commons recess from Monday, which would allow Conservatives to attend their party conference in Manchester, but both Labour and the Liberal Democrats have signalled their opposition. The summary of a phone call shows Donald Trump repeatedly asked his Ukrainian counterpart to investigate Joe Biden, the favourite to stand against him in next year's election. The US president is facing an impeachment inquiry, something Mr Trump has called a witch hunt. Ministers are being urged to modernise the law after a transgender man lost a High Court fight. Freddie McConnell had a baby last year and wants to be registered as father or parent on the birth certificate, but a senior judge ruled people who had given birth were legally mothers regardless of their gender. The Transport Secretary says reforms are needed to prevent travellers being left in a ridiculous situation like they are now after the collapse of Thomas Cook. 150,000 British holidaymakers are currently being repatriated. Grant Shapps says new laws would enable airlines in trouble to be wound down in a more orderly way. The LBC Markets report the FTSE 100 closed down 1 point at 72.89. The pound buys $1.24 and €1.13. LBC weather: showers in the north and east of England dying out overnight. Further rain moving eastwards, a low of 10. Tomorrow that rain clearing, followed by sunny spells and blustery showers, a high of 21 degrees. From Global's newsroom for LBC, I'm Andy Ivy.
Cross Question with Iain Dale on LBC. Text 84850.
It's 9 on LBC. If only you could have heard what Michael Walker just said, but possibly better not. A little bit of breaking news. The shadow Brexit minister, Matthew Pennycook, has resigned from the front bench. He wants to campaign vigorously for a public vote and unequivocally for the UK to remain in the EU. Michael Walker, on that basis, Emily Thornberry, Keir Starmer, John McDonnell, Tom Watson should all resign from the front bench. That's rather weird, isn't it?
I mean, yeah, this seems incredibly confusing news to me. I'll obviously have to look into it, but I don't really understand from what you've just said why Matthew Pennycook has felt he needs to resign.
Well, we will try and find out a bit more. I'm sure we have eager beavers trying to get him on the phone as we speak. Right, let's go to another question. You are listening to LBC's Cross Question. Alexander is in Hove. Hi, Alexander.
Good evening, Ian.
Hi.
I'd like to ask the panel, given what has happened with the Supreme Court and prorogation, do they think it is time for a wholly written and wholly codified constitution in the UK?
Well, I think we have to go to the political academic in our midst, Anand Menon, for this one.
I'm not a lawyer, so it'll be a very political answer. Personally, and this is simply a personal thing, no. For two reasons, probably. The first is actually to do with the Fixed Term Parliament Act, which is a salutary lesson about what happens if you write a document to address one set of circumstances and then circumstances change and that document becomes an absolute millstone around your neck. If we wrote a constitution now, we'd write it for now, and it might be a nightmare of a document 10 years' time when things have changed in ways we couldn't predict. And the second thing I would say, and this goes back to what I was saying earlier about polarisation, is to have a constitution that sticks, you need it to be written by people that everyone trusts. And I challenge anyone to come up with a bunch of 4 or 5 names that everyone in this country would trust to write a constitution. There would be so much suspicion around the authorship. We've seen what happened to the judges in the Supreme Court being castigated as being Remainers. Motives will be questioned. Back histories will be dug out. I just don't think it is something we can do at the moment.
Well, now that's a good parlour game. Just think of 5 people that we could all trust. Might come back to that in a moment.
Apart from you, Ian.
You wouldn't want me writing a constitution, I can tell you that for nothing. Stewart.
Well, Ian, you will know that Germany has a constitutional court, and I think
which we wrote their constitution,
the Basic Law of 1949,
the
and
Grundgesetz.
Indeed, and I think what happened yesterday in the Supreme Court is that the Supreme Court effectively became a quasi-constitutional court. I think a side effect of the whole Brexit debate and the referendum is a radicalisation of people hitherto on the right about what they took to mean good governance, what they accepted was good politics and governance, which, when you look at it, isn't and wasn't and has failed. You only have to look at, for instance, permanent secretaries, departments and their accountability. You only have to look at the performance of the House of Lords, the Speaker, the wider civil service. I think there is definitely a public debate to be had. Personally, I think now is the time for us to very seriously consider a written constitution because of the incursion of senior jurists into politics and various other things, because you need to begin that process of repairing the faith and trust, I think, of the general public in their politicians and those people who govern them.
I just want to butt in there very, very quickly to say that, I mean, it's very easy to claim that the people are worried, but when Ipsos do their trust ratings, 86% of people trust judges. So I don't think there's a wholesale loss of faith in judges going on in this country at the moment.
Be interesting if that poll was conducted today.
Absolutely, yes.
Yeah. I wonder how much that might have gone down.
That's a fair point, but I think fundamentally, if we are facing what I think would be an enormous crisis, which is effectively ripping up the result of the 2016 election, which if the Liberal Democrats win would happen, I think that would cause outrage, and I think people would look again at what they considered to be good governance in this country.
Do you think a written constitution would impact on that particular action? I mean, I agree with you, man, which is that, after how many hundreds of years' worth of history, we find ourselves where we are, and sitting down with a clean sheet of paper and starting to write a new constitution could easily become, create as many problems as not. Brexit Party is all about changing politics for good. And in response to Alexander's question, I would not start with a written constitution. I'd start with things like the House of Lords and places like that before starting to get into those places. I think there are much more immediate challenges which will improve the governance.
Are we the only country in the world not to have a written constitution? Because you think, well, if everybody else has got one, why shouldn't we have one too, Michael?
Don't go to me. I'm from the comment website. Ask Anand that question.
God,
I'll give you my opinion if you want.
Let's have your opinion.
I'll get on Google.
So I agree with Anand that it would be silly to write a written constitution purely to solve short-term problems. I think that's what we saw with the Fixed-Term Parliament Act, which was the Conservatives, David Cameron, he wanted to join a coalition government with the Lib Dems, and to strengthen it, he created this particular piece of legislation, which has had some quite significant ramifications. But I do think that the point about having a written constitution is also an opportunity. So we're in a moment where, yes, people are more angry about our political institutions than they've ever been, I think, but also they're more interested in them. And I do think that there are some real anachronistic features of our democracy which are well past their sell-by date. We have a House of Lords where the outgoing Prime Minister can pack it with someone who was, her press secretary. There were various people who were in our office with really insignificant positions who all just end up in our upper chamber.
All Prime Ministers
I'm not saying it's exceptional that Theresa May has done that. What I'm saying is there are a bunch of features of our democracy which don't seem that democratic and which often seem quite anachronistic and arbitrary. And given we're in a moment where people are incredibly interested in constitutional questions and how we organise our political democracy, I think this would be an opportunity to have a constitutional convention, and really deepen our democracy and deepen the population's engagement with it.
I agree with Michael. He's releasing my inner Marxist. I totally agree with him about the House of Lords. It's the second biggest unelected body in the world, apart from the People's Congress of China. There are people in there that there's no way they should be legislating. They're unaccountable. I think we've reached the end of the road with the House of Lords, and there has to be very significant reform very soon.
So if you were offered a peerage, you'd say no?
Well, I'm not measuring the ermine, Ian.
No,
but,
I'm not either, but I suspect...
I think you're ahead of me in the queue.
I doubt that very much. Right.
It's got a very good bar.
Several, I think. Let's go to Alexander. Thank you very much for that. Graham, we've had some very thoughtful questions tonight, and here's another one. Graham is in Leeds. Hello, Graham.
Good evening.
Evening. What's your question?
My question is this: if we are denied Brexit, what do you think is going to be the effect upon law and order in the United Kingdom?
Is that a hint that you think there might be dire consequences?
Well, because if you cannot change things through the ballot box by a clear majority, people are going to think, what's the point of democracy?
And you think their frustrations might boil over. I'm putting words into your mouth, but I think that's the implication here. Matthew Patten from the Brexit Party, do you have these fears as well?
I think it's a really, really good and important question. We've seen the scenes in the House of Commons, which have been very belligerent. I think passions are running really, really high about this issue. I think this issue is really binary. Whether it's people's breakfast tables or in their businesses that they work in their leisure time, this Brexit issue is building and building. And there are the fact, we talked earlier, didn't we, about facts and fiction. The fact is that 17.4 million people voted for Brexit in a referendum. They were clearly told by the Prime Minister of the day on several occasions that this was it, and if a deal wasn't done after 2 years, we would exit on WTO terms.
Well, we know all that, but that is no excuse. I mean, effectively, Graham is saying there might be riots. Well, and whatever you believe about how the politicians acted, riots cannot be justified.
No, I'm not justifying them. And I don't think that... I don't think he was trying to justify them.
I agree with you.
I certainly would not justify them at all.
But do you think they're likely?
I really hope they're not. I really hope that this process, our democratic process, in the end will get there. I'm amazed that we haven't seen more trouble on the streets. And let's face it, we've seen plenty around Parliament in terms of public disorder and things like that. But yes, I think there is a real possibility of it.
Michael?
I think it's probably overstated, and I also think it's a bit dangerous when a political argument is made whereby have a second referendum and there'll be riots, so don't have a second referendum. I mean, it's well within democratic norms to have two referendums on the same topic. We've seen it happen in France, we've seen it happen in Ireland, and you might disagree with it, but it didn't, lead to the collapse of society and democracy as we know it. So I think this can be overstated. What I would be worried about is that many people who voted Leave and voted for the first time that they'd voted in decades might feel very much disenfranchised from British politics, which is why I'm passionate about having a government who enters, power So let's rephrase that slightly. Why I'm reassured by it being a Labour government who would be implementing that second referendum is because they would combine that with a policy to massively reinvest in the country, massively expand democracy in the workplace and across Britain. And so I think whilst there will be a tendency for people to withdraw and feel alienated from politics, there'll be lots of countervailing forces which will be bringing them back.
Don't you think, though, can I just say, there would be an irony that a Labour government will be taking the side of merchant banks, multinationals, big business, which wants to keep us in the European Union, rather than the people. And I think that would be an enormous issue for natural Labour supporters.
So what I'd say there is, one, there are unsavoury forces on both sides of this debate, as there are good people on both sides of this debate. And two, I think when Labour enter government, it's going to be quite clear where they stand on questions of merchant bankers.
Anand?
I don't necessarily think there'll be violence. I don't think the threat of violence should stop us from doing something if it's something we've decided to do. But I fear the political consequences of overturning the referendum. A lot of people voted for the first time or the first time in ages on that day in June 2016, and they will lose their faith in democracy and the ballot box if they see that decision isn't implemented.
Right, we have. Thank you very much, Graham, for that question. We have a final question from James in London on a text. My question to the panel is this. Can they come up with a new phrase for someone who is transitioning or who has fully transitioned from Brexit to Remain or Remain to Brexit? There's an audible sigh of relief in the studio when I added that last bit. Is anybody? It is an interesting question because there are people who are doing both. I mean, moving from one side to the other, and we can all have views over how many are doing which. But is there a word that any of you can come up with for this? A trans-Brexiteer?
Brexit.
It's worth saying there aren't that many of them.
Is that right?
Yeah. I mean, if you look at the polls have shifted now. If you look at the poll on aggregate is about 50. It's about 53-47 Remain on the poll of polls.
Which it was just before the referendum.
But the shift from the referendum is made up almost entirely by the fact that people who didn't vote or couldn't vote in 2016 now fall out for Remain, not because loads of people changed their minds.
My producer's getting nervous about the question. We haven't said anything inappropriate, have we?
Not yet.
Not yet. Okay, right, let's bring this to a conclusion. Anand, Menon, Michael Walker, Matthew Patten, Stewart Jackson, thank you very much indeed for joining us. Now, don't forget, if you've missed any edition of Cross Question, you can listen back on the Cross Question podcast on the Global Player, Apple Podcasts, Google Podcasts, or wherever you get your podcasts from. We'll have another edition next week. Of course, it is the Conservative Party conference next week, or is it? I think it probably will be. It is 60 minutes past 9.
This is LBC.
Time is money. Or so money says. Well, money. I know you like to dictate every hour of every day, add to my to-do list and throw the odd spanner in the works. But not anymore. This is my business, and I run it on my watch. I'm in control now, money. And times are changing. Save time with instant business invoicing, now on the Barclays app. Search Barclays Business and make money work for you.
Must have a Barclays business account. T's and C's apply.
You're in charge of hiring and Indeed has solutions, like sponsored jobs, which increase the visibility of your post in search results to make sure the right candidates find you faster. And we give you this toy monkey, who will bang its cymbals when the right CV appears on your desktop. Okay, there is no monkey. There is no monkey. But there are sponsored